All right, we ready to go? Charlie, I'm ready to go. Everyone's ready to go. Charlie's good. All right. Good morning. Welcome again to Daniel. It seems like the name of this class is Daniel chapter 2 for the last month or so, and I apologize for that. It's going to be Daniel chapter 2 for probably another month. Maybe not that long, but so let's ask the Lord to bless our time. Heavenly Father, thank you just for the chilly breeze and how it reminds us that we're alive and it makes our skin shiver and Lord, that feels good and that could be a blessing. And I know lots of people don't like it, but Lord, no matter what, it's from you. And we just thank you for another day to live, love, and serve you. May everything we do today bring you honor and glory in Christ's name. Amen. All right. This is actually week 12. I don't know why I'm keeping the sequential numbers. I want to figure out at the end, how long did it actually take to go through Daniel? And one of the things that I thought about as I'm almost taking a wrong turn in Leonardtown, just daydreaming about it, is at the end, what I may do is have Hillary just compile them all of these notes, and bind them somehow, and let's see how big it is, just to figure out, is it worth doing a little bit of editing and maybe put them in PowerPoint charts or something like that. Just have a written record. I mean, it's good to, Lisa, you going to remember everything that we did? I don't remember what I had for dinner last night, and it's getting worse as I go along. So it's good that we write this stuff down, and it's helpful for me. I'm certainly using quite scholarly material, but I'm picking and choosing those things that really are easily digestible and more relevant. There's certainly lots of information out there that goes into much more detail about the nuances of different views and stuff. So last week we finished kind of the overview of Nebuchadnezzar's dream and Daniel giving him the interpretation. We kind of went through and finished just kind of the 50,000 foot view of Daniel chapter 2. What we want to do now is we want to go back into the text and go through some of the details that are there and ask some really pertinent, important questions. What kingdoms is Daniel referring to here in the image? When does the stone strike the statue, and what relevance does that have to our view of eschatology? What is the clay in the final portions of Daniel's fourth kingdom, the Iron Kingdom? What does that represent? So those are all questions we want to kind of do a deep dive, not with esoteric, boring details, but just enough to whet your appetite. Maybe some of you will dig a little bit deeper. Lots of resources out there, lots of commentaries, lots of scholarly papers. The age of the internet really helps. But on the flip side of that, the age of the internet, there's some real garbage out there too, concerning eschatology and even Daniel, interpretation of Daniel. What we want to do kind of as an introduction before we investigate some of the details of chapter 2 is we want to go through and do a quick survey of the dream, the interpretation, and kind of list what are those things that are clearly taught in the text here in chapter 2, given the interpretation. And I've kind of listed some of these things out for you, kind of in bulleted form, kind of goes through the progression of the image, the statue. So the first thing that's clearly taught in the scriptures here is that the dream that Nebuchadnezzar have is about the future. It is about the future. The text explicitly says that. In verse 28, it says, "There's a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. Okay, in the latter days. So we want to key on that phrase, because that's a term that we're going to want to, dwell on a little bit, latter days. But latter days certainly means future, right? What does latter days usually mean? It's typically going to mean, end of this age, end of this world, before the millennial kingdom, before the kingdom period. Okay, so it's about the latter days. And also in the next verse, Daniel says, while you were on your bed, thoughts turned to what would take place in the future. He who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will take place. Okay, again, another clear marker in the text. This is about the future. And then finally, at the very end of the interpretation in verse 45, okay, Daniel says, God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy, okay? We don't want to lose that fact. This is the purpose of this particular dream, this particular image and the interpretation is that God, for whatever reason, he decided to reveal this to a pagan Gentile king, a despot, dictator. For whatever reason, he chose to reveal the future to this king. And he used Daniel to provide the interpretation. So the dream is about the future. Okay, the second thing that's clear in the text is that the four parts of the image, and those are represented by, the parts of a human being and the metal that it's created out of, they represent successive Gentile kingdoms. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel says, is the head of gold. Okay, remember the phrase here in verse 37. You, O king, are the head of gold. And verse 39, after you will arise another kingdom. Okay, again, in the Middle Eastern mind, there was no distinction between a king and the kingdom. So it was quite proper for Daniel to say, Nebuchadnezzar, you are the king of gold. After you will come another kingdom. Okay, he's equating those two things. Okay, the after you is a big part of that. Okay, there was another kingdom that actually caused the downfall of the Babylonian kingdom. Okay, and they went in there. So these four parts of the image represent, successive Gentile kingdoms. And we saw that as we go from the top of the statue down to the bottom of the statue, that portrays the passage of time. Okay, passage of time. Okay, it says another kingdom of silver will come after him, after Nebuchadnezzar, then a third of bronze, and then a fourth of iron. Okay, so there will be four kingdoms, really five. The kingdom of God, we'll count that, but four Gentile kingdoms that will be coming in succession along with Babylon here. Okay, another thing we know from the text is that there's something special about this fourth kingdom. Remember, the second and third kingdoms, at least from God's perspective, there'll be another one after you, then another one. Then he gets to the iron one and spends quite a bit of time and detail about the iron kingdom, almost saying, look, this iron kingdom really is the focus of this whole dream. And why would that be? Because it's about the future. We already know the dream is about the future. Okay? The fourth kingdom in our vision, it has two distinct phases. It has the legs of iron, okay, and as you go down, something happens. There's another phase where clay is mixed in with the feet. And we saw the descriptions of the clay, what that does. It brings division, it brings weakness. There's certain aspects to this fourth kingdom that just doesn't have the strength of the original iron kingdom that's portrayed in the legs. So something is going on here in time in the latter phase of this fourth iron kingdom. Okay, again, the feet and the toes are iron and clay. We call that, the second phase of it. Okay, however, whatever your view is on when that happened, Okay, there's something different about that second phase with respect to the pure iron legs, okay, in terms of strength and unity. Okay. Another pair of things that are clearly in the text is that in the later phase of that fourth kingdom, God will destroy all of those other four Gentile kingdoms, and he will destroy them completely. Okay, again, how do we know he will destroy them completely? One of the details back in verse 35 is it says that the stone was crushed, crushed the gold, silver, bronze, and iron at the feet. It struck at the feet, meaning the stone is going to strike in the latter part of that iron kingdom. And it says the thing broke away, it crushed them all, but the remnants of that became like chaff. And the wind came and blew them all away, so that, here's the key point, not a trace of them was found. Not a trace of them was found. So what we expect is that when this stone strikes the feet and, all these Gentile kingdoms are destroyed, there are no vestiges of any of these that remain. Okay, so that, my big phrase that you see on the bumper stickers, coexist. Guess what? There is no coexistence of any Gentile kingdoms or powers with the kingdom of God. Okay, and that's why we preach, till we're blue in the face. This cannot be the kingdom, because there are nations that still call themselves kingdoms. The kingdom of Saudi Arabia, now, they've got a king. Even the United Kingdom, they got a king. Granted, he doesn't do so much. I apologize, Charles. I know you're a busy man. I don't mean you don't do anything. In terms of rulership, the way a king does. Okay, there's a very much a political post here that's talked about here. Then, in those days, when that happens, that's when God will set up that kingdom. So it's going to become very important for us to identify the when of that stone hitting the statue's feet. Okay, and there are a couple of different views on that. I think only one of them makes sense. Okay. All right. Any questions? Or anyone see anything totally obvious in the text that I missed? That's certainly possible, because I go through this kind of in a hurried manner occasionally. If you think of it, boom, get the hand and we'll stick it in there. So these are the things I think that are clearly taught. Now we want to try to go into a little bit more detail. And the first question that we really want to ask is, what are the kingdoms that Daniel is talking about here and prophesied? Okay, there isn't anyone in the entire history of Christendom that believes that first kingdom is not Babylon. Okay, why? It specifically says, you are the head of gold. Okay, so that's where all the views depart. Everyone agrees Babylon is the first kingdom is mentioned. But what's the second one? What's the third one? What's the fourth one? Okay, these are all things that we would like to determine, and it's important to our view. Since we know that from the dream there was going to come another kingdom after that, okay, we can look at history, both extra-biblical, secular history, lots of, archaeological evidence and that kind of stuff to nail down dates of kingdoms and kings and happenings in the ancient world. But we can also use biblical history too. There are several passages in the Bible that can be brought to bear on what the identity of these kingdoms are. All right, so there's two main views on the set of these kingdoms. And the first view is called, it goes along with the Maccabean thesis for the dating of the book of Daniel. Remember, there were two main views of the dating of the book of Daniel. Conservative view, Daniel, written 600-ish BC, late 500 BC, written by someone that was intimately familiar, probably was in the court, knew the imperial Aramaic language. If you go back in the notes, the evidence for the early dating of Daniel, we covered a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of reasons over a couple of weeks. You can go back there. But for the most part, people that accept that conservative view of the date of Daniel genuinely agree that the four kingdoms are Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Almost unanimously, they all would support that. However, the Maccabean thesis, remember, Maccabean thesis, mostly liberal scholars, some rank unbelievers, but there's some evangelicals in that mix, which is disheartening. That Daniel was written about 165 after all the facts of history since the time of Daniel, and he's not really prophetic or at all. He's just rehashing the history in prophetic language to encourage the Jews of his days to fight against, ironically, the Greeks. So at that time, in 165, it was the Greek Empire that was in charge. And so where would the Maccabean thesis put, what would he assign as the last kingdom? Well, he'd want it to be Greece, because the next one coming, Rome, since they don't believe there's any possibility of predictive prophecy, okay, they got to have it in their own day and age. So they're going to see the four kingdoms. And how do they make Greece the fourth kingdom of iron? They split the Medo-Persian Empire into separate ones. So their four kingdoms are Babylon, Media, a Mede kingdom, then a Persian kingdom, and then the empire of the Greek Empire, the Greek Empire. Okay. Now, we're certainly, as we go along, we're going to make some comments about the feasibility of that. But reading most of the information on the Maccabean view, it really is a liberal scholarship view that is seeking to disallow predictive prophecy. Okay, Daniel could not have written events so accurately before they occurred. He couldn't have done that. So they reject that before they even start reading the book of Daniel. And so it kind of, fits their, particular scheme here. So again, they separate the second and third kingdoms as the Medes and the Persians, okay? And we'll look at some issues there. But let's concentrate on the differences between those two views, and I've put them kind of in a table form for you on page 2, okay? In the conservative view, it was very convenient to just list the dates of those particular empires, because that is, the view that we'll just carry those along. Maccabean view, it's not clear when they see the beginning and the end of the Mede Empire, the beginning and the end of the Persian Empire. They certainly would see a beginning of the Greek Empire, but interesting, they don't have an end for it, because they believe it was written before the Greek Empire fell. So that's why I've skipped dates, because there really isn't much information. There's some conjecture, there's some guesses by some liberal scholars. When did the Mede Empire begin and end? But I think we're going to see that the conservative view really, it's the view that best fits actual history about what actually happened in the days. So if you look at, again, the conservative view, in the second column, here are the portions of the statue that Daniel is addressing. You've got the head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and then later on, feet, iron clay. Then you've got the stone growing into a great mountain. Okay, so our conservative view would see the Babylonian Empire, which fell in 539. which we have a biblical record of in Daniel chapter 5, right? The fall of the Babylonian Empire. The Media, and that was the Medo-Persian Empire, and this turns out this was a conglomeration, an agreement between a couple of kings. Rulership was kind of divided, and there's some evidence for that we'll talk about as we go along here. So this empire in 331 was overcome by Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great in 331 BC. And it was actually, he didn't last very long himself personally, but the Greek Empire lasted, for 150 years or so, something like that. And it fell to the Romans in 146 BC. And that's important because, again, the Maccabean thesis has the writing of Daniel in 165 BC. So about 20 years before the Roman Empire came. And it's kind of interesting. The liberal scholar has said there's no way that, whoever wrote Daniel could have predicted the Roman Empire would subdue and overcome the Greek Empire. But 20 years prior to the official fall of the Greek Empire, the Romans were already conquering parts of Europe over there. So to actually say there's no way that someone 20 years earlier could have predicted the Roman Empire would overthrow the Greek Empire, even though they were already gobbling up chunks of territory in Europe at the time and slowly moving towards, the Greek Empire and all of their possession, they still say, could not have foreseen that 20 years into the future, all that kind of stuff. So difficult to really, buy that argument from some of these liberal scholars. And then again, the Roman Empire, it took over in about 146 BC. Some people would see that there were two aspects to that. The eastern part of that empire fell apart about 476 AD. The western part kind of, meandered around for another 1,000 years, but eventually kind of, but the point is, this was not overcome by another empire. So in a very real sense, it wasn't taken over by another one. We know this is the fourth kingdom of iron that's being portrayed here. And you sit and you wonder, okay, are we still in that Gentile rule of the fourth kingdom? And I think you can make an argument, yes, you are. It's not particularly Roman rule or anything like that. Some people would say, well, the power and influence of the Roman Catholic Church kind of counts. You could make an argument for that. I don't think it's a real strong argument, but it's there. There's certainly that the church is still in existence. But I think it's almost a parallel or equivalent to when God told the descendants of David, look, you will rule on the throne as long as you obey. So there was always a promise that there would be a ruler sitting on the throne of David, but there wasn't a guarantee that he would exercise that rulership. So I think it's the same kind of thing, potentially. I might have a hard time arguing that and presenting it, but my own opinion, I won't charge you for that. That's free. It could be that the Roman Empire is still ruling, even though they're clearly not controlling the whole world. And it kind of brings the question, well, where is the world going? Well, it's almost kind of going towards a central rule and that kind of stuff. European, the European, financial system is unifying, a lot of those countries and wanting to get into NATO and all that stuff. There's lots of, at least, desire for the whole world to be under the same government, the same laws, the same economy, thinking, that'll just make things so much easier. Well, we read the Bible and we know that's not going to make things easier. Okay, now about this table. Oh, here's the scripture where those parts are, headed. You can see the Maccabean Empire. The legs of iron is the Greek Empire. Man, I'm parched this morning. I don't know why. And the coffee's not helping. But when we get to chapters 7 and 8, okay, there is going to be a lot of the details that we don't have from chapter 2. We absolutely will fill in chapter 7. The dream in chapter 2 was given to Nebuchadnezzar, had certain details. However, the dream in chapter 7 was given to Daniel. That interpretation of the 4 beasts will fill in lots of details in the text that are not necessarily available here in chapter 2. So what we're going to do when we get to chapter 7 and chapter 8, the ram and the goat dream that he has, which is really dealing with Media Persia and the Greek Empire, we're going to split this table out and fill in a little bit more detail when those details are available. That's in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8, so maybe this time next year we'll fill in this table, okay? That was a joke. I think it might have been a joke. I'm not sure. I'm not sure at this point. All right. So, why do we believe the conservative view is correct? That the alignment of the kingdoms is Babylon, Media Persia, Greek, and iron. Couple of different things. One, it's the one that fits history the best. It definitely fits history the best. If you believe that Daniel was written in 600 BC. My wife comes to bat for me. Thank you, sweetheart. Every sip of coffee I take this morning, it just makes my mouth drier and drier. I don't know why. I made the coffee, so I got no excuse. So first reason, again, fits actual history, but I put the first one is this identification of the kingdoms really has support amongst the earliest interpreters. And the one I'm going to pick on here is the Jewish historian Josephus. Okay, Josephus wrote in his Antiquities of the Jews, book 10, chapter 10, paragraph 4. Looks like a daunting thing to have to look through. See that web page down at the bottom? Wow, somebody typed all of that stuff in and made it hyperlinkable. I mean, it took me 1 minute to go find book 10, chapter 10, paragraph 4 and suck this out of it. It was so easy. So anytime you need to look at Josephus or just want to read from the Jewish perspective, the history of those days, and Josephus was born somewhere around 37 AD, and he died about 100 AD. So he was there for all of at least the apostolic age and the overthrow in 70 AD. And he was there when John wrote the book of Revelation. So this is a guy that was there in time, and this would have been mainstream, his view of what the Jews thought about Daniel's prophecy. So here's what he says. The head of gold, and again, there's some language here that's archaic and, maybe it doesn't perfectly. I mean, it's pretty clear that he thought that the head of gold was not just Nebuchadnezzar, but all the Babylonian kings kind of lumped, into one, which, that's not anything we should, worry about. But it says the head of gold denotes the kings of Babylon that have been before thee, but the 2 hands and arms signify this, that your government will be dissolved by 2 kings. Okay, that's a clue. Government dissolved by 2 kings. But another king, that shall come from the west, armed with brass, shall destroy that government. And another government, that shall be like unto iron, shall put an end to the power of the former, shall have dominion over all the earth on account of the nature of iron, which is stronger than that of gold, silver, and of brass. Daniel did also declare the meaning of the stone to the king. What is the stone? That's the coming kingdom. Daniel declared the meaning of the stone to king, but I do not think proper to relate it, since I have only undertaken to describe things past or things present, but not things that are future. Yet if anyone be so desirous of knowing the truth, blah, 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 go read Daniel. Okay, go read Daniel. Very interesting that he says, I'm not going to talk about things that are future, which means that Josephus, after the first coming of Christ, believed that the coming kingdom was future even from his time. And if he was in 90 AD or so when he wrote this, Jesus came 80 years ago. Because one of the views, the Maccabean thesis view, many postmillennial views, amillennial views, see that stone striking the statue as the first coming of Christ. Okay, we're going to take a hard look at that in the coming weeks. That's a critical point. But what Josephus is saying is he believed in his time as a Jew that the events of the coming kingdom were still future in 90 or 100 AD. In other words, the first coming was not the rock coming, destroying the Gentile kingdoms. Okay, and of course, who was in charge in 100 AD? Romans. Who was in charge 200 AD? Romans still. How about 300 AD? Still. 400 AD? Still. Okay. Romans were still an empire there. So this is why I think some that have the different Reformed persuasion are very adamant of redefining the kingdom as a spiritual type kingdom. It's because that kingdom, if it was established at Jesus' first advent, did not destroy the other Gentile kingdoms. So they say, well, it destroyed it spiritually, ruling in the heart. That's the kingdom. That's really what that means, okay? And, we as dispensational premillennialists, we would reject that. Sometimes out of hand, but I think we've got real good hard evidence that the kingdom was not established at Jesus' first coming. We'll look at that in the coming weeks. Okay. Actually, next week, I think we'll probably cover when does the stone strike the statue? When does that happen? That's a very important aspect. Okay. All right. So that's Josephus. He clearly, where was the actually? I thought there was something that he said that, but it clearly is Josephus held the conservative view. Let me read what I wrote here because I forgot what I wrote yesterday morning. Notice Josephus mentions he only talks about things past or present, but not things future, which, by the way, he indicates the kingdom is future from his standpoint. Since the kingdoms end with the iron one, he stops at present descriptions. Yeah, we can conclude he held the conservative view. So since he lived in the Roman era, he assigned that to the Iron Kingdom. And yeah. Now, another aspect of the earliest interpreters is the Jewish community at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. Okay, this sect, when they were writing and storing their documents, they believed that Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy, which we'll get to in Daniel 9, next spring, that's kind of was their guide. They believed that they were living in those times, that the Messianic era was kind of upon them. They believed that it was going to be fulfilled in their time frame. Interestingly, at least in one aspect, the king showed up in that time frame, so they had that right, but certainly not the nature of the kingdom. Okay, so they also identified in their writings that Rome were actually in the 70 weeks prophecy. They assigned the Romans as the people of the prince who shall come. Okay, and in that prophecy, when we get to, that has to do with the last days, that kind of stuff. So the Qumran community who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, they also were of the view that the Fourth Empire was the Roman Empire. So good Jewish company, at least around the time of the time of Christ. Now, how about the Christian community? Well, the vast majority, and I put this as probably an understatement because I bet you can't find one person that holds the conservative view of the dating of Daniel that doesn't agree with what these kingdoms are. Okay, I don't know of any, but I hedged my bet with the vast majority instead of all, just so I would cover my bases, right? Probability theory. Almost all church fathers espoused the conservative view. Okay, church fathers were those that wrote after the apostles passed away. It is said that the apostles or that the church fathers quoted scripture so many times. If you compile everything that they wrote, you'd be able to take all the verses that they quoted and construct the entire New Testament a couple of times. They quoted on just about everything. Apparently there's one particular verse, I don't know, I think it's in Jude, that nobody quoted on. It's like one verse, and it's probably not very meaningful. But for the most part, these guys wrote on everything. And naturally, they wrote on eschatology, what they believed about the interpretation of Daniel's prophecy. Okay? So, Babylon, Persia, Grecian, and Roman world, it's found, that interpretation is found as early as Irenaeus. He died about 200 AD. So he was alive at least 100 years after the construction of the New Testament, and he brings in his interpretation of Daniel's prophecy in chapter 2. He holds the conservative view. So early as Irenaeus. We mentioned Josephus and the Jewish rabbis, but Luther also says this. Upon this interpretation, namely the conservative interpretation, and the meaning, all the world is harmonious, and fact and history strongly prove it. Prove what? The conservative view, that these four kingdoms end with Rome. Okay, so all the way up to Irenaeus to Luther. All right, someone help me. I'm having a senior moment. Luther is 1500s or so, something like that. Is that right? 1500s. So 1300 years, that was the uniform view, the conservative view of the kingdoms. What kingdoms in Daniel's prophecy? Okay, another quotation. I'll skip the Talmud. The Talmud is like a Jewish commentary on the Old Testament, or that kind of stuff. They were fairly consistent in their views there. Medieval, Jewish commentaries, 1000 to 1500, something like that in the medieval years. But Jerome in the 4th century, all the way up to Calvin. Okay, again, a little probably later than Luther, in the 16th century, they all held this view. And so the point is, virtually all scholars who subscribe to the 6th century date of the writing of the book of Daniel interpret these kingdoms to be Babylon, Medio-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Okay, almost uniformly. Okay. And again, I can't find one that doesn't. I'm just saying almost uniformly. I ought to just say, find me one, I'm going to ask that question one of these days to someone, that really is knowledgeable in the real gore details of this kind of stuff. Are there any that hold the conservative view, or that hold the 6th century date that don't hold the conservative view? Be interesting. Okay, third reason why we think this is the conservative view is the right view is the metals that were used to convey the material in the statue. Why did God use different metals in the dream? Well, at least looking from the outside in, it looks like the metals are trying to convey information about the kingdom. Okay, you could say the value is going down. Certainly gold is the most valuable of all four of those metals. Silver, a little bit more valuable, than bronze, which is a little more valuable than iron. And, clay can make that in your backyard, right? So it's trying to say something, but also strength is an issue too. Gold being by far the softest. Throw a gold coin up in the air 10 feet and down, that's going to hurt your gold. You won't have the same face on it and stuff. But silver and of course iron being the strongest, that is a representation. We see that the strength of the kingdoms increase as you go down. Now, increase how? Most commentators would see because of the metals that were used, it's military type or the ability to govern, kind of like with a strong fist and that kind of stuff. So it may refer to the military. And some of these metals are well known for their use in military accoutrements. So why did God use gold to represent Babylon? Okay, I think for two reasons. Remember their chief god, Marduk, who was the chief. He was the god of the wind. He was the god of the mountains. He was the god of a whole bunch of stuff. One of those things, he was the god of gold in Babylon. Okay, the god of gold. So their chief god was the god of gold. Okay, an apt representation for Babylon. Second, Nebuchadnezzar used gold all over the place, in his buildings, in his statues, in his temples, and all that kind of stuff. Ancient Babylon, there was just gold in everything that they built was either gold or, layered with gold or that kind of stuff. There's a famous Greek historian that lived in the time frame about 380 to 425 BC. So about 100 years after Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom collapsed. Greek historian Herodotus, who was in Babylon and kind of, visiting, excavating, whatever. He was a historian. He was just totally astonished at the amount of gold that he saw in the ruins of Babylon. Okay, he mentioned even the walls of buildings were overlaid with gold. Okay, very apt, choice that God made to represent Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians with gold. Okay. Why was silver an apt description of the Medo-Persian Empire? Well, many expositors view their extensive taxing system that the Medes and the Persians kind of put into place really made advances, and I put advances in quotation marks, okay? It wouldn't be advances from God's perspective, but from a human worldly perspective, they made advances in commerce by making silver was a standard value of trade between nations and stuff. It was the exchange medium in the ancient world. So silver was an apt description of the Medo-Persian Empire, okay? The bronze from the Greek Empire, everything they made in terms of weapons of war was bronze. Armor and weapons and chariots and vehicles, all of that stuff was bronze overlaid. Every time you see, some depiction of a Greek soldier or anything like that, bronze is the key focus of that. And so that's why bronze was used to represent the Grecian Empire. And finally, iron, excellent description for the Romans, right? I mean, you see some of the things that I find it interesting that in The Chosen, when some of these soldiers, pull their sword out, you could tell they're struggling to get this thing out. It's not easy to hold this up. It's because it was made of iron. These things were heavy. To swing them, you were going to, lots of force here. Iron was certainly used, extensively in their weapons of warfare. Most of the swords constructed from that Roman Empire are made of iron. And really, that iron also really represents their tremendous military strength. The comment that, iron crushes, the bronze and the silver and the gold is an apt description. The Romans crushed the ancient world militarily. And certainly, their military strength was, perfectly depicted by iron. Okay? All right, we want to make a couple of comments on the Maccabean view here. Any questions or comments so far? See if we can get through the next. Yeah, that's interesting. You could spend some time thinking about that. Chris said, Jesus will rule with a rod of iron. That's interesting. Exercise for the class. Think about that. Because I'm sitting there, I'm gorped right now. I don't know what to say to that, but that's an interesting thought. That the material used for that last Gentile power that's going to be destroyed in the future by the coming of Christ, okay, the Lord will rule with a rod of iron. Now, that's probably just a euphemism for the strength of his rule. I don't think, if we were sure he would actually have a rod, there next to the throne that he was going to use for something, we could spend a lot more time thinking about that. But it may just be a euphemism for the strength of his rule. So I guess that's the best I got. I ain't got nothing else.
That makes sense.
Yes, Beth. In Revelation. Yeah, Revelation, the second coming. I don't know if it says iron. Let's flip over there. Revelation 19. Real quick. So verse 15, it says, from his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. And he treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of God. So it doesn't say iron sword, it says sharp sword. And, perhaps the sharpness of the sword is more important for the destruction of his enemies or that kind of stuff. So actually it doesn't say iron, but definitely he's got the sword coming out of his mouth. Okay. All right. The Maccabean view. It depends highly on the separation of the second and third kingdoms into the Media kingdom and the Persian kingdom. We want to look at some evidence that can't be, that some problems that the Maccabean view really has to try to address, and they haven't addressed them very effectively, I think, in my opinion. The first problem is this. When we come to the end of the Babylonian kingdom in chapter 5, okay, Belshazzar is in charge. Where is it? There it is. Daniel is speaking to the king, giving him the interpretation of the handwriting on the wall. He says this, your kingdom, Belshazzar, the last of the Babylonian kings, has been divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. Okay? That's a kind of a combination. Given over to those guys. Seems like this is a kingdom where both of them are going to be present. Okay? So that's something that the Maccabean folks, they really need to try to explain why it says given over to the Medes and the Persians. Okay? I think more importantly, if you go over to, and I didn't put the reference, I can't believe it. Let's see if we can't find it. Be in chapter 6 when Darius is tricked by his administrators and his commissioners into throwing Daniel in the lion's den. Okay, it turns out he had to do it. Why did he have to do it? Because he made the decree. He was tricked into making that decree, and where is it? And his commissioners in verse 8 in chapter 6 said this: "Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. The law of the Medes and the Persians. Now, why would there be a law of the Medes and the Persians if the Medes only took over the Babylonian kingdom? They wouldn't give a rip about Persian law, would they? Okay, same thing. Persians, okay, wouldn't give a rip. But it shows you that in some ways this kingdom was a unification of a Mede and a Persian people. Even their laws, the Medes and the Persians, the laws, okay, important part. All right, another reference to the Medes and the Purs, the law of the Medes and the Purs in Esther 1. You can go look at that. Here's an interesting one in 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles, the very last chapter, kind of summarizes, hey, you all are going to exile. Nebuchadnezzar's coming for you. You're going there for 70 years, blah, 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 blah. You've been unfaithful. This is why this is happening. Here it comes. It says in 2 Chronicles, I didn't put the reference, but it's in there. Those who escaped from the sword, he, namely Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Chaldeans, he's referenced to that, both of those names in the text. He carried away to Babylon, and they were servants to him and to his sons until the rule of the kingdom of Persia. Kingdom of Persia, okay? Now, interesting that if there was a separate Media kingdom and a Persian kingdom after that the biblical text actually says Persia. No problem if Persia is a conglomeration with the Medes, but if a separate Median kingdom was next, the writer of Chronicles would have said until the ruling of the king of Media. Okay? It's another issue that I think the Maccabean folks have a difficult time. And then finally in Daniel chapter 8, you've got the Media and Persia really depicted as the two-horned ram, okay? The two-horned ram, and in verse 20 actually gives you what the ram's identity is and the goat's identity. And again, we'll get there, chapter 8. It says, the ram which you saw with the two horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. Okay, ram kingdom, in this vision, two horns, Media, Persia. Okay, that's the imagery that's going on here, and that's what the text says. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece. Okay, and the large horn that's between his eyes is the first king, Alexander. Interesting that when Alexander came, the Jews were already back in Jerusalem, building the temple, that kind of stuff. When Alexander came into Jerusalem as the conqueror of the Greek Empire here, I want to go get this right, but I'm paraphrasing. The chief priests or some of the priests came with this prophecy in Daniel and showed it to Alexander that he himself was the fulfillment of this prophecy. It's a historical note. I want to go get a source for that. And certainly by the time we get to chapter 8, I'll have a source for that exactly. But my paraphrase, just from recollection, that's kind of what's been going on. All right, where am I here? Okay, so that was the 2 Chronicles passage, and then the Daniel chapter 8 passage. Now, one last thing was a couple of citations here. The citation is from a commentary called Daniel by Steinman. He says the Medes had been subsumed under the Persians 11 years before Babylon was conquered by Cyrus the Great. Okay, understand what that means. It's that the Persians, who weren't the world power just yet, subdued the Medes about 11 years before the fall of Babylon. Okay, so there was already a little bit of, monkey business going on with the Persians conquering the Medes here. But by the time Babylon was overcome, those two empires had unified into one. It says, Cyrus had combined the Median and Persian kingdoms in himself. Why? How? How did he do that? This is interesting. He was of Persian royal descent on his father's side. So his father was Persian, but his mother was a Mede. She married him, he was a Mede. So he had the blood of Mede and Persians in him. And interesting, he says he defeated the Median king, his grandfather. Okay? Wow, we can't relate to that, you're going to overcome this kingdom that your grandfather rules. You're going to subdue your grandfather's kingdom. I guess they did that back in those days. No explanation. Okay. All right. It should be noted that the Medes continued to play an important part in the Persian Empire, and the Greeks often called Persians Medes down to the 4th century. In their writings and that kind of stuff, they referred to the Persians as Medes. Okay? This was a conglomeration. Now, last thing, there's also some archaeological evidence, and I'm sorry that what I wanted to portray is not precisely in this image, but I'll describe the image here. This is archaeological evidence to support the combined kingdom of Medo-Persia. Okay? There's a stairway relief at Persepolis. It depicts alternating Persian and Median nobles conversing with each other on the way to meet the king. Okay? Below is a piece of that relief, but it's not the one with the nobles speaking back and forth. Now, notice the head dressings are alternating. Okay? Mede, Persian, Mede, Persian, Mede, Persian. This relief goes on to another section, poor image quality, not very good quality, but the difference, the next relief that sits next to it, some of the heads are turned backwards as if they were chatting with the person behind them, and then a relief after that, and then more on the other side in the middle is the king there, Cyrus, and they're all coming from both sides to address the king and stuff. So the piece of it that's right next to it shows these nobles talking amongst each other, Medes and Persians. Usually if you're the king of a country, subjects aren't talking with rulers of of the same race, that kind of stuff. So but that is just a really neat picture, good and clear. You should be able to find that out there on the internet. I did. Where did I find it? I did a Google search on, relief at Persepolis, and I found a bunch of pictures, and this was the best one that I could find. So, archaeological evidence, and the thing about archaeological evidence is it so often happens that as time goes on, you find more and more to substantiate the conservative view. I mean, all it really takes is for an unbeliever or a liberal scholar to say definitively that the Bible is not true, and guaranteed next week after that, there will be archaeological evidence found that smashes this guy's theory to bits. Or woman, her theory to bits in these days and age, right? All right. So now, why does the Maccabean thesis want to divide the second and third kingdoms into a separate Mede and Persian kingdom? Really, it comes down to the motivation to not allow predictive prophecy. That's really the reason. We don't allow predictive prophecy a priori before we even start. They can't hold that Daniel was written so many years before these events happened, because they believe Daniel would, whoever wrote Daniel in 165 or so could not have predicted, the Roman Empire. So they got to make it the Greek Empire. It's just, a presupposition. And it really is negating, the authority of the text of Scripture, the Bible's authority, the supernatural inspiration that God used, the Holy Spirit, to cause Daniel to write these things accurately. So They deny that. There'll be other problems that we'll look at again next week. For the most part, all of these Maccabean thesis folks believe that the rock hit the statue at the first coming of Christ. And we'll dissect that and put that theory to bed pretty quickly, and then go into details about when the rock hits the statue at the feet. That's a very critical aspect of our whole eschatology view. Georgia. I'm guessing the Persians, but I'm not sure. Let me see if I can go find that out. Certainly the Persians were a little more influential in that kingdom. The amount of territory that the Medes had prior to their fall to the Persians was small compared to them all. So I'm guessing that person 2, 4, and 6 there are Persians. Where is I thought I saw one of them had a sword. Can't really tell. Yeah, I don't know. So it could be that it's actually the other ones, because I see swords, at least in that 3rd and 5th one, but hard to tell. I'll do a little reading, see if I can't figure that out. Which ones are the Medes, which ones are the Persians. But point is, they were both there, going to the king. And that it enhances our belief that the conservative view is correct. And so we're going to assume that from here on. We'll look at the details of when the stone strikes the statue next week. Yeehaw. Dismissed.